At last, King of the Hill's 10th and final episode of their first revival season, titled A Sounder Investment. And while this isn't one of my favorites of the season, it is another very strong episode with a lot to love. Not only does this give us a pretty great conflict for post-retirement Hank and Peggy Hill, but it brings back an all-time fan-favorite character that fans have been clamoring for, and gives us the first real steps into Bobby and Connie's adult romantic relationship. There is a ton to go over in this season finale, so let's dive into Season 14, Episode 10, A Sounder Investment. And hey, if you like this breakdown, consider subscribing. Not only have I covered every single episode of Season 14, but I've posted my uncut reactions to all of them over on my Patreon as well, and I have a ton of other King of the Hill videos on the channel, and will of course be covering Season 15 next year. Hey, thank you for the support. Alright, so as far as season finales go, I think this one did a pretty decent job, mostly because it felt like a really great wrap up to the more serialized Bobby aspects of the season. As for the A story, it was definitely an episode I enjoyed with some very sweet moments, but it also didn't feel like it held much more weight than any other episode this year, and I know that's actually more or less par for the course when it comes to King of the Hill season finales, outside of the classic two-part cliffhang finales like Propane Boom or As Old as the Hills, so maybe this was just the exact right route to go. The bulk of this episode is about Hank and Peggy determining where to invest the little extra money they've got in their retirement, with Hank being pretty predictably conservative in his investment philosophy, whereas Peggy wants to have a bit more say in where they're putting their money.
Every second we do not invest is money lost. Remember, time is money.
But also remember, slow and steady wins the race.
This feels very in character for both Hank and Peggy. Hank in general has very low risk tolerance, and Peggy, well, definitely does not. But I also think this feeds into Peggy's post-retirement emotions as well, as she's trying to find more successes to occupy this next stage of her life. But I think the way they ramp into the conflict here is really well paced. John Redcorn comes over to show the gang his new product, John Redcorn's Red Corn, which everybody loves, but he also seeks help in getting rid of wild hogs on his land. Hank suggests trapping them while the rest of the gang wants to shoot them. And after the hog killing success and fun they had, Boomhauer suggests turning it into a full-on business. This is where the conflict between Hank and Peggy kicks in. For one, Hank feels a little spurned by his friends who sort of made fun of him for the hog trapping attempts, and two, Peggy wants a new project to invest in with their retirement money and sees this as a great possibility to make some money and help out some friends. Even after asking their advisor at the bank if it's something worth investing in, he not only suggests that it absolutely is, but that he'd like to invest as well. So just every step of the way, Hank's instincts are being challenged, and he very stubbornly continues to sit this one out. I love that Hank's conflict here is born of FOMO. He's done the Hank Hill thing this entire episode and fully stuck with his gut, but when he sees those around him getting excited and getting perks and equipment sponsors before Born No More even launches, it just really starts to get to him. And I mean, that fully absolutely tracks. This entire conundrum is like a picture-perfect example of the Squidward in the window meme.
I just don't understand. Y'all haven't killed Pig 1 yet.
I think this is a pretty interesting look into Hank's tendencies here. He's singular in that he's the only one who doesn't think this is a good business idea, but he desperately needs someone else to validate those feelings, which is understandable given that his wife and best friends are all on board. Usually Hank is pretty steadfast in his beliefs, but the way that FOMO creeps in forces him to seek that validation elsewhere.
I'm gonna run it past the most successful business person I know.
Enter Buck Strickland. Welcome back, Buck. Honestly, I really thought he would have died by now, so it was nice to see the old man make a return, particularly given that it's one of Stephen Root's best performances. Now, I will say, Buck's return does still leave a lot of questions unanswered. I think a lot of fans have wondered how and why Hank left Strickland Propane for his job at Aramco, and the only real concrete info we get about Strickland is this.
I'm retired, Hank. I got nothing but time now.
I definitely wonder if we'll get explicit explanations for how and why his time at Strickland came to an end, but I feel like a relatively fair assumption is just that Buck decided to retire and close down Strickland Propane in the process. Maybe there's more to it, maybe we'll get some flashbacks and see the actual scenario that led to Hank moving to Saudi Arabia, but my gut tells me that if Strickland was still an option, Hank would never have left, and then that the possibility of earning their retirement nest egg made sense for them to go to the Aramco base after Strickland closed down, which honestly is a very good thing because Hank deserved better treatment from Buck, and honestly he still does.
How much is the buy-in?
That's the same amount as you used to pay me in a year.
Well, that's nothing.
Basically, Buck straight up tells Hank not to invest in Boar no more, and then Buck fully buys the final available shares and takes Hank's place. Brutal and kinda classic Buck. Even in his mid-70s, he's just absolutely selfish and screwing Hank over. I love the way this continually ramps up the reasons Hank would feel this intense FOMO. His friends, family, and former boss/business role model all getting in on it while he sits it out, plus the perks and free equipment, including trucks. Oh, and Nolan Ryan is there too. Not to mention the fact that the stock is just going up, 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 and they are all making money. I really felt like this was the perfect storm to see Hank go against his gut and stubborn nature and give in to the peer pressure, buying stock far too late. It really just was a barrage of circumstances that would make him falter in his convictions. And he buys in just in time for the stock to absolutely crash out. Oof. At least it leads to one of the best bois of the season, though. But damn, did I really love this resolution, because as it turns out, Peggy sold her stock before the crash, getting out at the right time and recognizing that Hank's safer and lower risk tolerance was what convinced her it was all happening too fast.
I made the right decision because of you.
I guess we do make a good team.
I love that this doesn't frame either of them as being in the right, and that they complement each other's sensibilities. If either of them had gone all in on their initial convictions, they wouldn't have gotten much of anywhere. And the resolution being that they tag team the next decision for their investment money is really sweet, particularly given that it's to invest in John Redcorn's Red Corn. Also, genuinely kind of amazing that the final scene of the revival season included John Redcorn, given Jonathan Joss's tragic murder before the season began. I believe we'll still get his performance in season 15, but honoring him with the final scene in the final episode was fitting this year. But overall, this was a really sweet Hank and Peggy story. I think highlighting those ways they complement each other as a couple works really well, showcasing both of their strengths and weaknesses. Hank's stubborn, repressed attitude might force him to miss out on opportunity, while Peggy's gung-ho leap before you look attitude might cause her to make rash decisions. Together, they reel it into a happy medium. And I like that where the A story is about a 30-year marriage still finding the ways they fit together like a puzzle, the B story is about the beginning of a relationship finding how they fit together as well. And this is the part of the episode I most want to talk about, the Bobby and Connie of it all. Honestly, I really love that this was an ongoing development over the course of the entire season. Obviously, King of the Hill has always had slight serialized elements throughout, but this felt like a really effective through line that anchored the revival. After the events of conscious uncoupling where Connie and Shane broke up, Bobby and Connie are now going on their first date as adults. And that is a slightly awkward circumstance. Obviously, they have all of this history and familiarity, but they both lived so much life since then. And that's really what this entire B story is about. Bobby schedules their first date to be at this fancy violin concerto, because he knows Connie loved violin, only to learn,
You don't play violin anymore?
I don't.
this was such a smart way to approach Bobby and Connie's attempts to date again. Such a natural conflict for them to work through together. In a lot of ways, Connie and Bobby picked up right where they left off because they still have natural chemistry. But they have so much to learn about how they've grown over the years and how their lives have changed. They sort of both realized that they've got a workaholic tendency going on, so there's a little bit of commonality there. For Connie, it's pulling all-nighters for school. For Bobby, it's because he's basically solo running Robot Chain and has to stay up late doing a lot of the grunt work, which pretty comically leads to them both falling asleep during this ultra-long concerto, a funny, blunderous first date. Honestly though, despite this being sort of a bad date, it's an adorable story. If they do end up together long-term, it's a great first date story to tell. But they both recognize that this was sort of a dud and try to approach the second date differently.
We just need to figure out a good us date, you know?
I like this idea too because it's once again a supernatural mistake for them to make. They're chasing the relationship they used to have instead of learning what they're meant to be now and moving forward. Connie chooses a trampoline park, seemingly because it reminded her of when Bill had the Christmas-themed bounce house in season 5's 'Twas the Nut Before Christmas. Crazy title, by the way. But that was also the episode where they both got drunk for the first time, so there's some mixed feelings there.
Remember the creepy guy who sold us beer? And I remember throwing up.
Though I will say, with that episode being referenced, given where we're at right now in the show, this is sort of a cute line to look back on.
Just think, Connie girl, when we're grown-ups and marrieds, we'll get to do this every night.
Connie pretty quickly dislocates her shoulder and they have to go to the hospital, and I love that this still shows that Bobby is very proactive and helpful in this situation, knowing Connie's allergies, blood type, and immediately having that info for the doctors. It proves he'd be a caring and thoughtful boyfriend, but this is also where Bobby starts to realize that they really still might be living in the past in terms of what they know about each other.
What if all our connections now are just memories of the connection we had when we were younger?
Honestly, I'm so grateful that the show didn't put Connie and Bobby together immediately when the revival began, and also that they didn't make this a particularly simple reunion. It's nice to know that they're essentially going to be learning about the adult versions of each other as they continue to date, and aren't just some meant-to-be couple because they dated when they were kids, which does kind of seem like what a lot of the fandom wanted, which bothers me a bit considering King of the Hill's dedication to realistic character dynamics and relationships. But this final sequence is sweet despite Connie being hilariously drugged up, but her lack of inhibitions cause her to blurt out this incredibly honest admiration she has about Bobby as an adult.
You're the bravest person I know because you knew exactly what you wanted to do and you are doing it.
I really loved the detail that this final thing we see them geeking out about are related but not identical. They're both talking about cool things happening in South Korea, but Connie is talking about quantum dot emitters and Bobby is talking about kimchi, leading them to being interested in traveling there. To me, that's always been an important formula in a relationship, having overlap in interests but not one-to-one interests, things you can share with your partner and vice versa, and subsequently share in each other's excitement through their eyes. I really do think that this through line with Bobby and Connie was my favorite aspect of the revival. It felt so naturally paced, and even as someone who basically went on record saying I didn't really want them to be together in the revival, the fact that they built to it instead of introducing it as a given or expectation made it really work for me. And that is all I've got for King of the Hill Season 14, Episode 10, A Sounder Investment, but let me work through some of my feelings on the season as a whole before we go. I know I've echoed these sentiments across all of my coverage for Season 14 of King of the Hill, but I just cannot express how much I adored this revival. I feel like King of the Hill was the show that would be the easiest to absolutely mess up in an attempted return, and somehow, even with plenty of new writers on the staff, they just so beautifully captured the spirit of the original series. It's been so cool to not only be surprised and captivated by the revival, but to see that the majority of fans agree that it is of impeccable quality. I think the most important thing here is that the show understood the assignment when it came to the characters. Nobody felt out of place, nobody felt like they had been flanderized, everybody felt like the characters I loved and remembered. They didn't overly rely on finger pointing at modern trends, they naturally introduced those modern trends to these familiar characters and the stories bloomed from there. And they adjusted pretty seamlessly to fit the modern TV landscape. Even with just 10 episodes, they managed to deliver 10 distinct episodic stories that also delivered a satisfying ongoing through line for Bobby, adapting slightly into the serialized age without betraying the core of the show. I do think that the new season seemed to avoid leaning into explanations and backstory for how or why things have changed, to slightly mixed results. They give pretty minimal explanation for the new status quo. We don't see how Hank left for Saudi Arabia or what it took for Bobby and Chain to partner up when starting Robota Chain, and I think that largely worked to its benefit. It allowed us to focus on where the characters are now, not where they've been, but I do think there are some notable places where this didn't serve them. The fact that Luann and Lucky were not even mentioned a single time really stood out to me. Obviously, there is a portrait of them in the Hill House, but I was expecting that we'd get at least some insight into how or why they left and where they are now. Though given some of the buzz from the writers in interviews, I expect that we'll get a definitive answer at some point in Season 15. They seem to imply that they were written out pretty specifically, though if I am being honest, I really felt the hole in the show where Luann used to be. She remains one of my absolute favorite characters, and while I'm less attached to Lucky, I really missed Luann in Season 14. And though I do fully understand the inclination to retire the characters in honor of Brittany Murphy and Tom Petty, given that the show has now recast so many of its characters and might need to recast John Redcorn for a second time, I think I'd almost prefer if they just recast Luann. It hurts me a little bit to say because Brittany Murphy was and is a legend in this role, but I just really love to see how Luann has grown, where she and Lucky are, how Gracie has been raised, what their relationship to Hank, Peggy, and Bobby is at this point in their lives. I think those things are worth a little bit more to me at this point than hanging the characters' jerseys in the rafters. At the very least, I hope we maybe get Gracie in for an episode in Season 15. It would be at least a serviceable way to get a window into Luann and Lucky's lives post-finale. But with how strong these episodes are, I honestly have no problem saying that I'd love to see this series continue continue as long as they want to write it. And with how successful it was, it's hard to imagine that won't happen. It was just an unequivocal smash success both critically and especially in ratings. As of writing this, we have no confirmation that the show has been renewed beyond next year's 10 episodes, but I would be absolutely shocked if it didn't happen. Genuinely flabbergasted. And that's it. So folks, thank you so much for sticking with me covering the newest season of King of the Hill, even though it took me forever to get these last 2 breakdowns done. But what a great season it was. If you enjoyed them, please stay tuned. I will be covering classic King of the Hill episodes periodically, and of course I'm going to dive headfirst into season 15 the moment it's available next summer. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.